Hello everybody, today we're going to take a look at the governor's elections for 2024. I already took a look at 2023, I did the ratings, there's not many of them, and there's not a whole lot more for 2024, but we're going to do a quick preview and go over any highlights. So on Ballotpedia, we've got the list of governors here that are up for re-election. There's 11 of them, and 5 of them are term limited. So let's go in alphabetical order, and we'll start in Delaware. Now, incumbent Democrat John Carney, he's term limited. He was in there for 2 terms, so it will be somebody else winning this election. So on Wikipedia, there's some list of potential candidates for the Democrats. I would say 3 of these are high profile enough. We've got the lone U.S. representative from Delaware, the lieutenant governor, and the attorney general. So that could be an interesting battle for the Democrats. Now, there's no potential Republican candidates listed. Delaware is a pretty blue state. They have not elected a Republican governor since 1988, and John Carney, last time he won with over 59% of the vote. Now, Delaware is the kind of state that could elect a Northeast liberal type of Republican, sort of like Charlie Baker, Larry Hogan, or Phil Scott. But there's not really a bench here for the Republicans, and there's plenty of time left, so we'll be watching Delaware. The next state is Indiana, and I did a video on this a couple of weeks ago. Incumbent Republican Eric Holcomb, he is also term limited. And U.S. Senator Mike Braun, he's not running for re-election to the Senate. He's going for the governor's mansion. He's probably going to be the front runner. We also have the lieutenant governor in the race here as well. And there's other candidates that might jump in. There's one poll here, shows Mike Braun in the lead, but that is from Braun's campaign. And the Democrats have a small chance to win in Indiana. It's a pretty red state. They have not elected a Democrat since 2000, so most of the focus will be on the Republican side. But if it's a great environment for the Democrats and the Republicans nominate a horrible candidate and some scandals come up, then the Democrats have a shot. And the next state is Missouri, and incumbent Republican Mike Parson, he is also term limited, so that will be an open seat. And Missouri has pretty much become a red state at this point. We've got one candidate declared, that's Mike Kehoe. He is the lieutenant governor, but we could potentially see Jay Ashcroft get into this race. He's the Missouri Secretary of State, and also the son of John Ashcroft. You might remember him. He was previously a senator and the governor of Missouri. For the Democrats in Missouri, there's not a whole lot going on here. We've got the mayor of Kansas City, Quentin Lucas. Other than that, it's early. There will probably be more Democrats that get in, but I think it's going to take the right kind of candidate to actually be even competitive in Missouri. The next state is Montana, and there's actually no dedicated page here yet on Wikipedia, but incumbent Republican Greg Gianforte, he's able to run for a second term. And back in 2020, he won with over 54% of the vote. He has yet to declare what he's going to do. Possible he runs for the U.S. Senate to take on John Tester, but personally I think it's more likely he would run for re-election, or he also could end up retiring. I think that would be the least likely. If he does run for re-election, I think he would be highly favorable. But the Democrats, they're not uncompetitive in a state like Montana, but for the Senate and for governor, they've certainly elected their fair share of Democrats. Let's move on to New Hampshire. Now, New Hampshire is one of 2 states, along with Vermont, that elects governors for 2-year terms, and incumbent Republican Chris Sununu, he is eligible to run for a 5th term. He's yet to say what he's going to do. We've got some potential candidates here. We've got Kelly Ayotte, Don Bolduc, Chuck Morris. You might remember a lot of these names. They did come up for the U.S. Senate in 2022. Kelly Ayotte, she was also a previous senator. And there's somewhat of a bench for the Democrats. We've got the 2 U.S. representatives, Annie Custer, Chris Pappas, Tom Sherman. He lost to Sununu for governor in 2022. So sometimes people want to change, even though Sununu is relatively popular. Sometimes voters want to change it up after 8 or 10 years. So I don't know what Sununu's going to do. I would say if he runs again, he's going to be favored. If he retires, then it could go either way. The next state is going to be North Carolina. Incumbent Democrat Roy Cooper, he is term limited. He won re-election in 2020 with about 51.5% of the vote. And I would say that was a little bit more narrow than expected. So Cooper is regarded as probably a good fit for North Carolina. It's a relatively conservative state in the South. It does lean red on a federal level, but they're open to electing Democratic governors. So this is going to be a very competitive race. For the Democrats, they've got the Attorney General Josh Stein. He's probably the top candidate. I don't know if he's going to clear the field. There's one poll here from back in October. Stein is in the lead with only 22%, 39% undecided. It's a little bit outdated. There's some other potential candidates that could get into this race, but Sherry Beasley, Cal Cunningham, those are some failed statewide candidates. I would think they should not and would not get into this race. So it's a long time away, but Josh Stein is probably the front runner. And he even has a bunch of endorsements here already. Most of them are from North Carolina. Now, on the Republican side, it's going to be interesting. And there's a few candidates that have publicly expressed interest, but the most notable, I think, is Mark Robinson. He's the lieutenant governor of North Carolina. He got elected back in 2020 along with Roy Cooper, and they're elected on separate tickets. So there was enough ticket splitting to elect a Democrat to governor and a Republican for lieutenant governor. Now, Mark Robinson, if you don't know anything about him, I would urge you to take a minute to see what he's all about. He's certainly a Trump supporter. He's outspoken about that. He's not afraid to dive into the cultural issues. And of course, he's filled with statements that would be considered highly controversial. He could probably get his own video, but I don't want to go too far into it. But as you can see here in the hypothetical polling, Mark Robinson, he's far and away the front runner at about 60% of the vote. So right now, I think this is a pure toss-up. No idea how it's going to go. It's all going to come down to the individual candidates, the national environment, and the specific issues. So let's move on to the next state, and that's North Dakota. Now, North Dakota did not have term limits for the governor up until 2022. So they amended their state constitution, and now there is a limit of 2 4-year terms. Now, incumbent Republican Doug Burgum, he's still eligible to run for a third term. He has not declared what he's going to do yet. He won with almost 66% of the vote back in 2020. So if he runs again, it would be really hard to imagine him losing. And outside of Burgum, there's no other potential Republican candidates and no Democratic candidates listed. So let's move on to Utah. Incumbent Republican Spencer Cox, he's running for re-election to a second term. In 2020, he won with 63% of the vote, but a lot of the Republican base is not satisfied with him. He's bucked his party on certain cultural issues, and given that it's such a red state, he's really presented himself as more of an establishment politician, so it's possible he gets a primary challenger. I think he probably has enough crossover appeal to be successful in a general election, but for the Democrats, there's no potential candidates listed here. I don't know who could challenge him. This is pretty much a safe Republican seat. The next state is Vermont, and that also has 2-year terms. Republican Phil Scott, he might run for a 5th term, he might not. Given that Larry Hogan and Charlie Baker are out of office now, Phil Scott is clearly the most liberal Republican in the country as far as governors go. Even with those two in office, it's possible he would have that same title. So back in 2022, he won with almost 70% of the vote. And even though Vermont is one of the bluest states out there, Phil Scott appears to be an ideal fit. So if he does run again, I can't imagine him losing that race. But as we see on the Democrat side, there's a lot of potential candidates lining up. Now, if Phil Scott retires, then this will immediately be a toss-up race, and I would probably think the Democrats are even favored. So there's a lot that could end up happening here in Vermont. And let's go on to the next state, and that is Washington. And that has incumbent Democrat Jay Inslee. He's eligible to run for a 4th term. In 2020, he won with over 56% of the vote. Washington is one of the bluer states out there. It's been a long time since they elected a Republican, so there's a chance they might be getting a little bit sick of Jay Inslee. Now, I think he's certainly the favorite. That's if he runs. If he retires, I still think the Democrats are going to be favored, but at that point, the state would actually be competitive. Now, also keep in mind, Washington uses the top 2 primary. All the candidates are on one ballot, regardless of party, and then the top 2 of those move on to the general. So there's not much of a Republican bench here in Washington. So it's just a little bit too early. We'll have to see what happens over the course of this year. And the last state is West Virginia. Incumbent Republican Jim Justice, he is term limited. He used to be a Democrat. He did switch. He became a Republican, and he won with over 63% of the vote in 2020. So there's a chance Jim Justice ends up running for the U.S. Senate to take on Joe Manchin. And aside from that, there's a lot of Republican candidates here that want to get into this race. We've got a bunch here that have already declared. It's too early to say if there's any kind of a clear frontrunner. And over on the Democrat side, there's not many candidates here. I think they know that they would be the huge underdogs, as West Virginia has just become one of the reddest states out there. And it wasn't super long ago. It was technically one of the bluest states, even though it was a very conservative state. So whichever Republican emerges, they're going to be the heavy favorite in the general election. And that pretty much sums it up. That's a bit of a preview of all 11 governor's elections for 2024. We'll see if anything changes over the next year, but let me know in the comments, which of these 11 races are you most interested in? It's probably going to be North Carolina, could be West Virginia, but let me know down below. On your way out, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next video.